Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Unnecessary Nonsense Podcast YouTube channel. I promise we're not going to do like a daily update on the AAF because I don't think that would be interesting for anyone. But since I made a video about it a couple of days ago and a couple of more things have come to light, a little bit more information is available now than when we did the first video, I thought I would give a little bit of an update just so that we were up to date in terms of where we are right now. Anything else that comes up, we'll talk about this weekend on the podcast and it'll be on there. But for the YouTube channel itself, I thought I'd take a little bit of a screenshot and talk a little bit about the information. I'll give you the short version, and if that's all you want, you can then take off. If you do end up doing that, we'd appreciate if you give a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel because we will make videos like this from time to time if a story or something warrants it. Otherwise, it'll be once a week. We'll put up the podcast that is also available on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get podcasts, and I'll talk about that at the end. So really quickly, let's just get into it. So this was basically where we started. The very first thing that came up was the reporting that Hurricanes majority owner Tom Dundon, invested $250 million in the Alliance of American Football. Now, from that standpoint, where you went from there depended on which news outlet you were looking at. Some of them just outlined it this way, where they basically just said what it was. The original article from The Athletic took more of a negative slant on it, saying that it was kind of an emergency. It was necessary because otherwise they were going to miss payroll, which could very well be the case, but we were still missing context. Why were they missing payroll? Why was it in a situation where the influx of cash was required? Also, the other thing, and kind of what I mentioned in the previous video, was that when you say they needed $250 million to make payroll, you're implying they needed $250 million to make payroll. Well, simple math would tell you that the amount of players in the league and a cap of $70,000 per player, even 500 players, that's a $35 million payroll broken up over 10 weeks. Assuming you're paying them weekly. Again, I don't have a contract in front of me. I don't know how they break it up. But regardless, you don't need $250 million. And one of the articles that I'm going to reference for you in a minute, and by the way, all the articles I have here, I'm going to put in the description so that you can take a look at them for yourself and come to your own conclusions. But I'll give you my interpretation, and I'll take a couple of snippets out of this just to give you some context. So using this first one here from ESPN, from Emily Kaplan, so we'll credit the appropriate people here. So they mention here, The Athletic reported that the league was in danger of not making payroll on Friday, which is kind of what we talked about before Dundon's investment. So the AAF co-founder Charlie Ebersol dismissed reports that the league was getting a financial bailout. That's kind of the narrative that you had between what the league was saying versus what some of the news outlets were reporting. Part of the issue could have been mitigated by the AAF itself if they had been a little bit quicker off the gun with it, because by the time the Athletic reported it, it has a more ominous tone. If you say, well, we were short on payroll, we were worried about not being able to pay people, that's going to concern people. And that's also going to leave you with kind of a media battle that now you're fighting to try to convince people that you're viable and that you're in solid footing. But like I said, I'll give you a little information in the next article that'll give us some more about that. So this piece here is kind of what I'm going to refer to is Dundon himself say, I had seen the deal when they were conceptualizing the league, he said on the ESPN On Ice podcast. It wasn't something that I would do because there were so many questions about the quality of football and all the things that come up when you try to start something new. Once it went on TV, looked great, got good ratings. I talked to people that were supportive of it. This is kind of important because when you're talking about a major investment, my point in the previous video that I made was that I didn't see any reason why anyone would invest that much money if A, you were concerned that they were going to fail. If you felt like the only way this league is continuing is if I throw $250 million into it, that feels like throwing away your money. So you're not going to do that. But if it's kind of a proof of concept, which is actually something that I'll bring up here in a second, then it gives you a bit of a different mindset. So I won't go too much more into my thoughts and analysis. I'll quickly zip through a couple of these articles. So this is kind of the baseline that we started with. After that, a little bit more information came to light, which we assumed it would. So I'll use this example here from the Orlando Sentinel. Yeah, the Orlando Sentinel. So this article here from the, Mike Bianchi blog here basically is talking about Steve Spurrier, implying that the reason why there was such a urgency or why it happened so quickly at that point is that, according to Steve Spurrier, goes, I think what happened is an original investor sort of led us, Ebersol and the Alliance, into believing that they could come up with the money to get us through the first year, and then he sort of bailed out. He didn't have the money, and we found Tom Dundon. I think Tom Dundon liked the idea so much, he became the majority owner of the league, and now we're all set to go for quite a while. Now, the idea of an investor, an initial investor, being there and then pulling away financing would kind of give you the scenario that you came across where suddenly you were finding yourself short where you weren't expecting to. That would give you kind of the urgency that would prompt the deal to happen quicker. But at the same time, it also kind of jives with the timeline because you don't want to be going into week 2 and then suddenly your accountants would be doing a terrible job if suddenly you didn't realize you had enough money. You would have been kind of mitigating about that beforehand. But if you were expecting some money to be available that suddenly wasn't, that's something you may not be able to account for. You can argue that you don't want to be in a position where one person pulling money out suddenly puts you in that position, but that's a different conversation entirely. So that's kind of the Steve Spurrier. Again, I'll leave this article so you can read the rest of it. But the other article I'll mention to you here is this one here from NBC Sports, Pro Football Talk Directly, so by Michael David Smith, talking about the Tom Dundon himself and his angle on it. And the point that I got from this is that he was approached originally about investing during the planning stages. And that kind of jives with a little bit of the information in the first article. But specifically, what I would point out here, and this is a little bit more important, about the dollar amount. The dollar amount is headline grabbing, but it's important that this piece kind of be mentioned because Dundon himself is making a point about it. He says he's not spending $250 million right away, but he's putting up that much money. So basically committing it to the league, putting up that much money to ensure the league isn't worried about going out of business. The idea being to stabilize it. So his statement here is the league has many years of cash if things don't go according to plan, implying that the amount of money is to potentially hold them up for beyond the first season into a second season if they have any issues with cash or with developing that fan base, which could take some time. There is some support and there is some fans that are growing out of it right now. There is decent television numbers, but you can't out of the block expect to be doing huge business, especially since you're developing it. But markets like San Antonio, who are already showing support for the league, and other markets like Orlando, I believe, drew about 20,000 for one of the games. So if you can actually start building off of that, then having the financial security to know that you don't need to make all the money in the first place immediately is actually really helpful. So specifically here, the way we set it up, I think, is well in excess of what I think we'll need for the league to be sustainable or profitable without me having to prop it up. So that I would say would be kind of a stabilizing statement, is what he's trying to say, that it's enough money to ensure that they don't have to worry about being cash strapped. So instead of waiting for more potential investors to kind of keep things rolling along, you have this one investor who can kind of take the load of ensuring that there's enough money to do whatever you need to do. So one more thing I'll mention here is that he stated, as far as the developmental league, I don't build things to sell them, so that wouldn't be something I'd even think about. I can't predict the future, but it's not even a conversation that I've had. So as far as that's concerned, those are kind of the updates. The additional information, the Steve Spurrier thing is a bit speculation, but it does kind of jive with the timeline. It makes a little bit more sense why you would suddenly need an investor, but also having the big splashy number, 250 million, also kind of sends a message that you're saying this person is here and willing to commit a lot in order to ensure that the league is viable and solid. So as far as the updates, that kind of covers it. So if that's all you really wanted to know about, then you're good. And I appreciate you watching those so far. And again, we'd appreciate a thumbs up or, subscribing to the channel. I do have a couple of thoughts related to this. So if you're gone already, great. If you want to stick around for a moment, then I'll kind of mention why this additional information kind of became interesting to me once I started to think about it in a different way. So specifically what struck me, and unfortunately I don't have the comment that I saw. It was actually a Reddit comment that someone made, and I'd love to give them the credit for it. If I can find it, I'll try to include it in the description. But someone mentioned, and they said the words minimum viable product. And I hadn't really thought about it that way, but when they said that, it set something off in my mind, because I've read up on business and lean startups and things like that, and it's something I'm interested in. But the minimum viable product, and I'll include the definition here for you, a minimum viable product is a product with just enough features to satisfy early customers and to provide feedback for future product development. So here I'm going to show you something about the minimum viable product. So I'm going to focus here on the Alliance of American Football website. The reason why I bring this up is that one of my initial critiques or criticisms of it was that while I appreciated the on-field product, it felt like the website wasn't quite up to the caliber. So when you think of maybe an NFL or an NHL or the NBA or even Major League Baseball, you have a site with a lot of interactive elements, interactive scoreboards, and the schedule is a little bit more dynamic. Whereas the Alliance of American Football website, it has all the elements that you're looking for, but it basically feels like a series of templates. On game day, you'll have a certain template. You have the splash page. You have the logos to take you to the different team sites. Everything is clean. There's nothing wrong with it, but it was lacking in features. The same way the app also seemed to be lacking in features a little bit, in the sense that it had basically the minimum required, which kind of brings me back to that statement I said a second ago. It has enough to satisfy the initial people, but it also seems to be lacking in the resources that you would think would have been put forward. So that kind of leads me to wondering if there isn't some credence to the theory, posed by Steve Spurrier, and also that kind of plays into this. If Dick and Charlie Ebersol were thinking about this in the sense of a startup, which they do reference in other articles, if you then forget about it as a football league, if you think about it more as a startup in the sense of the way you would think of a software startup, or, like a Facebook or a social media company or something, when you've got a startup, normally you have rounds of financing that you accumulate. And then what happens is you keep slowly adding additional features to a product. So if you're doing the minimum viable product model, what you're trying to do is you do exactly that. You get something out there for those early adopters who to try. The idea being that if it's completely rejected, if you see absolutely no potential in it and nobody even wants to touch it with a 10-foot pole, then you can kind of cut bait and move on without really investing a lot of your energy and money and all the things you would want to put into it. However, if some of the early adopters see potential, they can then be your biggest advocates, but also, more importantly, they can be critics. They can be people that are going to tell you, hey, what about adding this? Where is this? I was looking for this and I'm not seeing it. And that's kind of where all this kind of starts to make a lot more sense. Whereas I was looking at it from a sports league standpoint, the initial startup costs have to be tremendous. That's why the 250 million was a very interesting number. Obviously, Tom Dundon is saying that that's a commitment for potentially a longer period of time to get them up to where he thinks that they can go. So he's investing with the idea of seeing the potential. Well, now with those additional resources, the question becomes, if it follows that minimum viable product model, that means this website could see some improvements. It means the app could see those additional features that we were talking about. It means it can get all those elements, whereas right now you've got upcoming games, you've got the app information here in a little bit, but it's all still kind of basic. There's a very good possibility, if that's what was being done here, is that they were kind of holding back, trying to keep the resources they did have for as long as possible to give them enough time to basically showcase the league and as almost a proof of concept, getting to the point where someone like a Tom Dundon could see the potential and then invest the big dollars. If that's the case, then it seems to have worked. And if that's what ended up happening here, then that's actually potentially very encouraging for the league. That's something that they can look at as potentially the first step towards solidifying themselves. And if they go through the season and it becomes successful and they're able to sustain ratings, they're able to improve attendance, they're able to get that in-game experience up, and they show some staying power, then that's where their relationships where they're already on the NFL network. So they're already on the NFL's radar. Being there and then potentially being, if they become some kind of an official developmental league for the NFL and they get that extra credibility, that gives them a big feather in their cap going in, having completed a season, having shown some promise, and then having that direct association that an upstart XFL in 2020 wouldn't necessarily have out of the blocks. The XFL has better marketing chops, I would say, in terms of the people behind it. Vince McMahon knows how to promote, but this league at least is out of the blocks, and getting solidified early could potentially be a big advantage, especially if you're first out of the gate. So that's kind of where I'm at as far as this is concerned, based on what we know now. We'll probably have some more thoughts, like I said, on the podcast. It'll be something that we'll discuss. As far as the rest of this is concerned, if you made it to the end of the video, much appreciated. Again, if you could offer a like, or if you would like to subscribe to the channel, we would appreciate that. I will quickly show that on here. So we're just getting started. Literally the YouTube channel is not that old. Podcasts are go up here. There are occasionally videos from time to time. I did post a video with my week 2 Alliance of American Football thoughts prior to the $250 million investment. And then obviously this update video from that. Like I said, we're not going to spend all our time talking about the AAF. We do talk about other sports as well, but we'd appreciate if you'd at least take a look at it. So again, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.